welcome to another episode of Dress Histories with. And today, something completely different. So far, we've looked at mountaineering women and the clothes that they wore in the 19th century. We've looked at the wardrobe of a very wealthy and privileged woman in the shape of Queen Alexandra. But today, I am taking you on a journey through some of the research that I'm actually doing right now, the project I'm working on as we speak. And it actually relates to something that is a bit of a rarity. I call them dress diaries, but that kind of is my own made up name for it. I don't know if that's the best way of describing these particular phenomena, but they are some really interesting objects, and I hope you will enjoy what I'm going to share. So maybe the best and most famous example of the thing that I'm actually talking about here, the most well-known surviving example anyway, is the one that was created by a woman called Barbara Johnson in the late 18th century. For anyone that's interested, this is a book that the V&A, it's actually at the V&A in London. This enormous volume is one of my treasures. You can see it's a very decent sized book. It was written in the 1980s. It is called Lady of Fashion, Barbara Johnson's Album of Styles and Fabrics, and it actually recreates in facsimile the album itself. Sorry, it's a bit unwieldy. So you can see it is this beautifully detailed archive version of the volume itself, which is in the V&A. This is just a sample of one of the pages from the book. Barbara Johnson kept this as a record of her financial accounting, really. It's an accounts ledger, and inside she pinned pieces of fabric relating to material that she was buying for it to be made into garments. She detailed how much she had paid per yard. Sometimes she included an image of the kind of garment that it was going to be made into, and sometimes details of where she wore things. So it's a really special object. She used this method of recording her clothing from the late 18th and into the early 19th century. But it really is a rarity, this kind of object. Women were making these kinds of ephemeral, or as they have been perceived to be, ephemeral objects for some time. Another really lovely example of this idea of creating making something by hand or using something that's related to an album kind of practice was another one by Mary Delaney. This is another really lovely book. It's called The Paper Garden by Molly Peacock, and it is a biography of Mary Delaney, who created these wonderful paper cuts. It's difficult to see here, but I'll include some more images. Here are some better versions of them. These are made from tiny, tiny slivers of paper that she created these beautiful botanical collages. They were so accurate that they are still used today as botanical drawings. There are lots of surviving examples of hers that still exist, and they're very beautiful executions of flowers. Just when you look at them, you can't quite believe that they're actually made from paper. You think that they would have to be painted. So this kind of practice of women using paper as a base and filling albums or folders with this sort of activity was certainly happening, if not common. It's difficult to know, in the 18th and 19th centuries. There were also growing examples of scrapbooks that women were purchasing and filling with all sorts of different things. Alexandra, for example, I've already spoken about her wardrobe, but her creative practices also veered in this direction as well. This is a page from one of her photographic collages that she created, where she cut around the outlines of relatives and people in her circle and then placed them into these painted scenes. So she was creating these sort of fantasy backdrops, and the idea was that they were just, it was whimsical, it was a fashionable thing to do. From the mid-19th century onwards, it was possible to buy scrapbooks that had these ready pasted pages. So the idea of sticking scraps or creating colourful, sort of multifaceted pages was becoming much more of a trend. There are lots of examples of Victorian scrapbooks. There are some great people on Instagram, Papers of the Past, for example, that is full of all sorts of different Victorian scrapbooks. They might be pictures, they might be menus, all sorts of ephemera, those things that people keep as souvenirs and memorials of things that they've done or seen. What is less common, however, is this idea of the dress diary. There are some that survive. In the 19th century, I've found maybe 5 or 6 examples so far. One is the dress diary of Ida Jackson. It's in the Brooklyn Museum in North America, and it runs from the mid-19th century through for a number of decades afterwards, with more or less focus on certain periods of her life. And within this, she pasted samples of her clothes or fabric and descriptions of what they were made into, sometimes including trimmings, sometimes little snippets from fashion periodicals that gave an idea of what kind of garment of clothing she was having made. And it was a record really of her life through dress. So that's why I call it a diary, because it's broadly chronological. It does chart broadly the shape of a life, but there isn't very much writing. It is told through material objects. There are other examples as well. There are just a couple of pages here from some of the others that I've found so far, that are lovely records of mostly young women who are charting their way through life, using dress as a means of telling their story, because dress is so central to what they experience. Dress is an area of life that they have a measure of control over, perhaps more so than many other aspects of life in the 19th century. And that brings me on to my current research. In 2016, I was given the most wonderful gift. An elderly friend of mine was clearing out her apartment and asked if I would like some things for myself and my teaching, and I spent a very happy afternoon helping her to sort through various things. Her family they'd kept certain things, and these were the things that she just wanted to know that they were going to a good home. And so there were dress patterns and objects that I was able to use for teaching. And then one of the last things that she brought out of a trunk was this. It was wrapped in brown paper, and when I undid the brown, very wrinkled brown paper, I found this absolute treasure inside. It is a pink silk covered volume. It was so fat and bulging with frayed pieces of fabric I could see sticking out that I immediately knew that it had to be something remarkable, really. As I turned the pages of this volume, I could see that it was absolutely bursting with all sorts of amazing things. It's over 400 pages long. It is a marble covered, you can just see a bit of the paper marble cover underneath the silk volume, plain pale blue pages, and covering each page were a variety of different fabrics on each page, sometimes 4 pieces, sometimes 1, sometimes 12, all cut into either rectangles or octagons or hexagons, these carefully shaped pieces, and above each piece a little caption with a name, a year, occasionally a place, but not very much, very little in the way of written detail. My friend didn't know anything about it. She had acquired it in the 1960s in London from a flea market, and she had had it ever since. She'd always intended to do something with it. She didn't know what, but had decided that that time was past, and so she gave it to me. And so it came with no provenance, no origins, no helpful name to identify it or to root it in any time and place. The dates covered the period from around 1838, and the final date in the book towards the back of it was 1870. So it covers this several decades of the 19th century and mid-19th century. And so it has become my mission over the last couple of years to try and find out as much as I can about that book. This is just some of the other pages within it. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's surprising how much I have found. I don't want to give too much away at this stage. I'm writing a book about it, writing as we speak. Even during pandemic, I'm carrying on and enjoying it very much. So I do now know who owned the book. There was one very serendipitous entry that identified, just gave a name, and it was the only time that she actually identified herself in the book. She simply said, Anne Sykes' dress, May 1840, the first dress I wore in Singapore. That single line, the only time that she referred to herself in the first person, actually took me to Anne Sykes. So I know that the book belonged to Anne Sykes. And now I know an awful lot more besides. That one sentence unlocked the whole of its secrets, really. And I am managing to now uncover a whole network of people, of her community, of the people that were part of her life and that fill the pages of this book. It takes me from Lancashire to Singapore and back again, and the colour and variety is fantastic. So hopefully I will be able to share more with you at a future date. But in the meantime, I hope you've enjoyed, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.